When you shift your energy from chasing to choosing, something powerful begins to happen, not just within you, but in the space you once shared with someone else. People don't start missing you the moment you walk away. They begin missing you the moment you stop showing up emotionally. It isn't the physical absence that echoes the loudest, it's the energetic withdrawal. And this only happens when you start to reclaim your power. Reclaiming your power is not loud, it doesn't involve announcements, it's not an act of revenge. It's a quiet revolution. It's the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who never took time to understand you. It's when you stop pouring your soul into conversations that leave you empty. It's when you stop asking why they changed, why they pulled away, why they didn't choose you. Reclaiming your power is when you stop giving them your peace in exchange for their temporary attention. When you're in a state of emotional neediness, you chase, not because you're desperate, but because you're trying to correct a wound. You chase because you want to feel valued. You want your love to be recognized. You want your presence to matter. But the more you reach out, the more your worth becomes negotiable in their eyes. And slowly, you stop being someone they admire and begin to be someone they tolerate. But this is when you lose your power. But the moment you stop chasing, the dynamic shifts. Something begins to shift in their world. Not immediately, but eventually. The silence grows heavier, the empty messages become noticeable. Your energy, your support, your consistent presence, it all vanishes. And they start feeling the weight of what they took for granted. But this doesn't happen while you're still hoping. It doesn't happen while you're checking your phone. It happens the moment you let go. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. They begin to miss you when you stop giving them access to your light. Your light was something they assumed would always be there. That warmth, that encouragement, the way you remembered the small things, the way you forgave what others would have walked away from. That's what they begin to feel the absence of, not because you disappeared, but because you elevated. You removed your energy from the situation and reinvested it into yourself. When you start choosing yourself, you stop waiting. You stop hoping for a text, for an apology, for them to suddenly realize your worth. You begin to understand that you were not the one lacking. You were not the one hard to love. You were simply giving love to someone unequipped to hold it. And the moment you own that truth, the emotional tide turns. You no longer look backward. You begin to look inward and then forward. That's when your healing begins. And that healing is powerful. That healing is attractive. That healing is magnetic in ways you can't imagine. It radiates. It shows in your tone, your posture, your mindset. You stop begging for love and you stop becoming love. And when that happens, they feel it. They feel the shift in your tone, the change in your vibe. You're no longer reactive. You're no longer emotionally entangled in their inconsistencies. You're no longer trying to fix or force anything. That calmness you now carry, it unsettles them. Because people can sense when you've detached. They may not say it, but they feel it. That's when the missing begins. You used to be predictable, always there. Always ready to talk, explain, repair, nurture. But now you're unpredictable. You're silent. You're focused. You're building. You're no longer asking why they stopped. You're too busy understanding why you stayed as long as you did. That change doesn't just shake them. See, people don't miss the person, they miss the energy. Your energy was healing. Your energy was safe. And now that it's gone, now that you pulled it back, there's an imbalance in their life. They might try to fill it with distractions, other people, noise. But nothing will replicate what you brought to the table, because your presence was never shallow. You didn't show up halfway. You gave fully, deeply, authentically. And once someone experiences that level of depth, nothing surface level ever satisfies again. But here's the deeper truth. They don't miss you while you're still hoping. They don't miss you while you're watching their stories, replying to their posts, sending them signals. They miss you when your silence becomes a boundary, when your absence becomes your answer, when your life begins to reflect peace without them. That's when it starts to register. That's when they start replaying moments, rereading messages, remembering things they once dismissed. It's not instant. It's not dramatic. It's slow. It creeps up on them. They wake up one day and realize you haven't called. You haven't reached out. You haven't tried. And it will confuse them because they got used to your effort. They fed on your attention. But now that supply is gone and they feel it, not just mentally, but emotionally. They may not admit it, but they feel the loss. Not because you disappeared, but because you evolved. You chose you. And that choice, that single shift from chasing to choosing, changes everything. People often assume others start missing them right after they leave. But that's not how the emotional process truly works. What really creates the void in someone's heart is not your physical absence. It's the emotional distance that grows in silence. It's the stillness after the storm. It's not when your voice stops echoing in their ears, but when your energy stops showing up in their life. Emotional distance creates space for reflection, and reflection invites realization. That's when they truly start to miss you. When you're always available, always reaching out, always initiating, people become desensitized to your presence. Familiarity breeds a kind of blindness. They don't see you because they're used to you being there. They don't hear you because they stop listening. Your words start sounding like background noise. Not because they weren't valuable, but because they were constant. And when something becomes constant, it becomes assumed. So your value gets buried beneath routine. Your love gets taken for granted, not because it wasn't pure, but because it was always present. Then one day you stop. You don't call. You don't reply instantly. You don't show up with the same emotional intensity. You start pulling back, not with hostility, but with wisdom. Not with resentment, but with clarity. That's when emotional distance begins. And that's when they start noticing. The absence of your emotional availability stings more than any blocked number or deleted message ever could. See, physical space doesn't force people to think. But emotional silence does. When your laughter isn't there to fill the awkward moments, when your encouragement isn't there to lift their mood, when your kindness isn't present to balance their chaos, they notice. Not because they suddenly value you more, but because your energy no longer cushions their emotional gap. People don't reflect in noise, they reflect in silence. When there's too much activity, too many distractions, they stay numb to what's real. But silence has a way of amplifying emotions. It makes the heart louder. When you emotionally detach, the person is left alone with their own thoughts. They begin to realize the difference between attention and affection, between presence and partnership, between someone who's available and someone who truly cares. They may scroll through their phone trying to fill the space. They may text others, call old friends, go out more, but something always feels off. Because it's not just you they're missing. It's what you represented. is the calm in their chaos, the emotional safety you brought, the way you listened when they were unsure of themselves, the way you saw them, not just what they showed you, but the parts they hid from the world. That kind of connection is rare. And when it's gone, they feel the void in 1,000 little ways. They start remembering things. Not just big moments, but tiny details. The way you used to check in, the specific phrases you used, how you'd notice when something was wrong without them saying a word. Those memories aren't triggered by your presence, they're triggered by your absence. And more importantly, they're triggered by the emotional gap you left behind. That gap can't be filled by anyone else, no matter how quickly they try to move on or how easily they pretend to forget. This is where the shift happens. This is where the longing begins. Not when you walk away, but when your emotional presence fades. The texts feel colder. The conversations less meaningful. The silence heavier. Emotional distance creates a vacuum, and vacuums demand to be filled. The mind starts to reach backwards, trying to reconnect to what it once ignored. But the thing is, you're not the same person anymore. Emotional distance doesn't just affect them, it transforms you. You begin to see things clearer. You start understanding your own patterns. You start noticing the way you used to overextend yourself. You stop romanticizing their potential and start recognizing your value. And the more you realize what you brought to the table, the more you start feeling bad about stepping away. They, however, begin to feel the cost of not matching your energy. They begin to wonder why you're no longer emotionally invested. They may reach out casually, hoping you'll respond the way you used to. But something's different. You've changed. You're still kind, but not desperate. Still compassionate, but not emotionally tied. That emotional distance created space for them to reflect and for you to heal. And that's when the weight of your absence becomes real to them. Not when you physically left, but when your heart stopped leaning in. When your thoughts stopped circling around them. When your conversations no longer revolved around fixing what was broken. That's when they begin to understand that emotional availability is not something they can demand. It's something they were once given freely, and they let it slip. That realization doesn't come in a moment of joy. It comes in quiet hours, when the crowd thins out, when the distractions fade, when they sit with themselves and realize how deeply your presence had influenced their peace, not because you tried to be everything for them, but because you were real, because you gave more than just time, you gave connection. And now, in the wake of your emotional withdrawal, they start to see how rare that connection truly was. There is a quiet power that begins to emerge the moment you stop begging for love and validation. When you stop pleading to be chosen, heard, understood, or wanted, you create a shift not only in the dynamic between you and the other person, but more importantly within yourself. That shift may begin as a whisper, a subtle withdrawal, a small act of self-respect, but over time, it grows into a steady wave of personal power. And it's in this power that your healing begins. And ironically, where they finally start to realize what they lost. People do not truly value what they can easily access. When you're always available, when you're constantly proving your worth, explaining yourself, defending your intentions, or trying to get them to see your heart, they don't feel the weight of your presence. In fact, they often misinterpret your loyalty as weakness. They confuse your love with neediness. They assume your efforts are driven by desperation, not by choice. And so, they never stop to appreciate the depth of what you offer because in their eyes, you'll always be there. But then one day you don't reach out. You don't check in. You don't ask how they're doing. You don't wait around hoping they'll finally see your value. That's the moment the energy shifts. That's the moment when your healing begins. Not because they acknowledged your pain, but because you did. You finally saw what staying was doing to you. You finally realized that chasing love feels like abandoning yourself, and you've done that for too long. Healing doesn't start when you walk away physically. It begins when you stop trying to convince someone of your worth. It begins when you decide that you no longer want love that you have to fight to receive. When you're no longer willing to sacrifice your dignity for connection. When you'd rather sit in silence with yourself than engage in conversations that drain your soul. That's the true beginning of healing. That's when you stop hoping they'll come around and start understanding why you held on so tightly in the first place. You start looking inward. Not to blame yourself, but to reclaim the parts of you that got lost in the trying. The version of you that kept overgiving, the version of you that ignored red flags, the version of you that stayed when you should have left, that apologized when you did nothing wrong, that accepted less and called it love. When you stop begging, you begin to see how much of your energy was tied up in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being alone. But the silence that follows your decision to stop chasing brings clarity. You begin to see that loneliness is not the same as being alone, and peace is better than chaos dressed as love. And while you're quietly rebuilding, they begin to feel something different too. They start wondering why you stopped, why the messages stopped coming, why you're no longer engaging, no longer reacting, no longer seeking their approval. At first, they may think it's temporary. They might assume you'll come back. But days pass, weeks, and the stillness remains. That's when the missing begins. That's when your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. Because now they feel the void. They remember how you used to show up emotionally, how you could sense what they needed before they even said it, how you stood by them when others walked away. They feel the emptiness of not being seen in the way you once saw them. It's not just your kindness they miss. It's the emotional security you gave them. The comfort of knowing someone was genuinely in their corner. And no one else offers that kind of depth because no one else cared the way you did. But you're no longer waiting for that recognition. You've already turned inward. You're focused on healing the parts of you that got attached to proving yourself to someone emotionally unavailable. You're learning how to give yourself the love you once begged to receive. You're replacing longing with peace. You're slowly becoming whole without needing anyone to complete you. You start to see life differently. You start to move differently. You're more discerning. You protect your energy. You stop explaining your boundaries and start enforcing them without guilt. You begin to understand that love should never feel like convincing someone of your value. And now that you've tasted the power of self-respect, you can't go back to chasing. They begin to sense that too. Even if they reach out again, even if they send that message, they notice that something in you has shifted. You're not as responsive. You're not as eager. There's no anger, just indifference. And that is what unsettles them. Because the emotional pull they once had on you is gone. You've grown through the pain. You've transformed through the silence. And now they're left with the memory of who you were while you've become someone entirely new. It was never your begging that made you valuable. It was your presence, your energy, your heart. But now you've reclaimed that for yourself. And that's when true healing begins. There comes a moment when your presence stops being something others consume and starts becoming something they feel the absence of deeply. But that moment never comes when you're constantly chasing, explaining, proving, or reminding someone of your worth. It arrives in your silence. It arrives in the stillness that follows your decision to pull back, not as a game, not as revenge, but as self-preservation. That is when your value begins to echo in their mind. They don't begin to truly miss you when you cry out in frustration or plead to be seen. In those moments, they only hear noise because they've stopped truly listening. It's when the noise dies down, when your messages no longer light up their phone, when your energy is no longer present in their life. That's when the weight of your absence starts to settle in. And that weight is not just emotional, it's spiritual. Because you are more than just someone who cared, you are a presence. A presence that held space for them. A presence that brought balance, compassion, understanding, and patience. And now, all of that is gone. They begin to feel it in small, unexpected ways. They may not admit it out loud, but it shows. The moment they look for your name in their notifications and it's not there. The moment they remember something and instinctively want to share it with you, only to realize you're not a text away anymore. The silence becomes deafening. And it's not because you're punishing them. It's because you finally decided to let go of being the only one who tried. That silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. It says, I loved you enough to try, but I love myself enough to stop. It communicates strength. It reveals a version of you they weren't prepared for, the one that no longer needs to be needed. They didn't see it coming because they assumed you'd always be there, that you'd always come back, that no matter how poorly they showed up, you'd forgive, explain, and resume the cycle. But you've evolved. You've grown past the point of emotional begging. And here's the deeper truth. Silence creates contrast. It forces them to compare the peace you brought with the emptiness they feel in your absence. When you were present, your care may have felt ordinary to them. But now, in the silence, they begin to realize just how much your love was a rare currency. The way you remembered the little things, the way you anticipated their needs, the way you held space for their emotions, even when they didn't have the words. No one else does that. No one else feels like you. And the realization of that is slow and painful. They may try to replace you. They may distract themselves with others, with noise, with validation from every direction. But true connection isn't something you can duplicate. It's felt in the soul, not in the surface. And so even in the arms of someone else is an echo of you, a comparison, a lingering void that no amount of temporary attention can fill. Because it wasn't about what you did, it was about who you were. And they can't recreate that energy. But while they're sitting with that realization, you've already started to return to yourself. That silence isn't just about removing them from your world. It's about hearing your own voice again. It's about recalibrating your sense of worth. It's about rediscovering the parts of you that you set aside just to maintain a connection that was never mutual. You start pouring that same love and energy back into yourself. You focus on your peace. You protect your mental and emotional space. And with each passing day, your silence becomes not a lack, but a boundary, a sacred space where your healing happens. And the more you stay in that silence, the more powerful you become. Because in that space, you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. You're no longer tangled in emotional chaos. You're observing. You stop being pulled back into cycles of confusion, guilt, and over-explaining. You realize you don't need closure from them. You become your own closure. You don't need validation, you validate yourself. That silence becomes your fortress, your shield, and your freedom. Eventually, if they reach out, they'll sense the difference. Your responses will be calm, detached, maybe even kind, but not emotionally invested. They'll feel that something's changed, even if they can't name it. The power they once had to pull you back in, it's gone. The emotional leverage they once relied on, it doesn't work anymore. Because now your silence has taught them a lesson no conversation ever could. You no longer try to prove your worth because you've realized you were always worthy. You were just offering your value to someone who couldn't see it. But your silence gave them the space to finally notice. It made them confront their own emotional immaturity, their inconsistency, their failure to meet you where you stood. It forced them to sit in their own discomfort, the same discomfort you used to soothe for them. But now, you're no longer their emotional crutch. You've moved on. You've stepped into your power, and your silence continues to speak on your behalf. This healing is a quiet, deeply personal process. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's certainly not something that depends on whether or not the person who hurt you ever apologizes. One of the hardest truths to accept is this: the closure you are waiting for may never come from them, and that is exactly why you must give it to yourself. The apology you keep replaying in your mind, the one you think would finally bring you peace, might never be spoken. And if you keep holding on, waiting for them to acknowledge your pain, to say they were wrong, or to take responsibility for what they did, then you allow their silence to control your healing. You keep yourself emotionally stuck in a place they've already walked away from. There's a deeper form of strength that comes when you finally say to yourself, I deserve to heal, even without their permission. You stop romanticizing closure as a conversation and start embracing it as a decision. You decide to no longer carry the weight of unanswered questions. You stop begging for clarity and start choosing peace. Because most of the time, the people who hurt you are not equipped to offer the kind of accountability you seek. They may not even have the emotional awareness to fully understand what they did, let alone express remorse in a way that would bring you true comfort. And here's the truth they won't tell you. Some people know exactly what they've done. They know they manipulated, disrespected, ignored, or took advantage of your love. But admitting that would shatter the image they have of themselves. So they rewrite the story, deny your experience, or go silent altogether. They avoid responsibility not because you're wrong, but because facing what they did would require more maturity than they're willing to develop. So instead of facing themselves, they hide behind distraction, blame, and pretense. And while they carry on with life as if nothing happened, you're left holding the emotional debt they created. But that debt does not belong to you. Their lack of closure is not your burden. The real healing begins when you return that emotional weight back to where it came from. Not through confrontation, but through release. You let go not because they apologize, but because you are no longer willing to pay the price of waiting for one. That's the moment you begin to reclaim your power. That's when the emotional ties start to loosen. You stop checking your phone hoping for a message. You stop rehearsing what you'd say if you ever saw them again. You stop explaining your pain to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. You begin to make peace with the fact that some people are incapable of giving what you needed from them. That doesn't mean your feelings weren't valid. It means they didn't have the tools, the maturity, or the willingness to handle you with care. And that realization, while painful, is also liberating, because now you stop trying to squeeze empathy out of someone who can't even be honest with themselves. You stop reopening wounds in the hope they'll bring bandages. You start closing the door yourself. That's not cold. That's not bitter. That's healing, real healing. The kind that doesn't depend on anyone else but you. It doesn't mean you erase the memory. It means you stop living in it. You start living for yourself again. You rebuild slowly but surely. You process your emotions without judgment. You give yourself space to feel everything: anger, sadness, confusion, grief. But you don't let those emotions trap you. You feel them so they can pass through you, not so they can define you. Eventually, you come to a place where the absence of an apology no longer stings the same. You stop needing it to feel validated. You stop believing that their acknowledgement is the key to your peace, because you realize peace is a choice. It's something you give yourself when you decide to stop bleeding for someone who never brought you healing. You take back control of your story. You rewrite the ending, not with vengeance, but with understanding. You no longer carry their silence like a scar. You wear your healing like armor. And they may never know the damage they caused. They may never realize the depth of your love or the pain they inflicted. But you'll know. And more importantly, you'll know that you survived it, that you rose from it, that you stopped waiting for them to fix what they broke and started building something better for yourself. You become the one who chose peace over chaos, who chose growth over resentment, who chose self-worth over waiting. Your healing becomes a quiet revolution. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. You begin showing up in the world differently. Not hardened, but wiser. Not closed off, but more discerning. You know now that your healing isn't a gift anyone else can give you. It's something you claim step by step, moment by moment. As you walk away from the need for validation and toward the truth of your own worth. When someone finally starts to miss you, truly miss you, it's not just your smile they remember, it's not the photos you took together or the last words exchanged. What they begin to miss, often too late, is the peace your presence carried, the way you made life easier without them even realizing it. They miss the way you listened, really listened when they spoke. They miss the way you anticipated their needs, often before they ever voiced them. But none of this hits them right away. It's a slow realization, often quiet and subtle, that creeps in when life gets noisy without you. It's not your absence that stings at first. It's the contrast. The energy they now experience with others that doesn't feel like yours. The conversations that feel hollow. The attention that lacks intention. The laughter that doesn't heal. They begin to notice how others only take while you used to pour. You gave without keeping score. You stayed even when they pushed. You forgave even when they didn't ask. You tried, really tried, to love them in the most patient and graceful way possible. But because you made it look effortless, they never realized it was rare. At first, they thought you were just another good moment. Something that came easy and would always be there. They mistook your love for convenience because you never made them beg for it. You gave freely and they consumed carelessly. But as the days go by, the emptiness grows. Not just because you're gone, but because now they're left with versions of connection that feel nothing like what you gave. And it dawns on them. What they had with you wasn't just love. It was sanctuary. It was security. It was the kind of presence that made them feel safe in a world that rarely is. Now they scroll through old messages, not to relive the past, but to search for clues of where they went wrong. They read your words, and for the first time, they don't just see what you said. They feel what you felt. Every message you sent hoping to be heard. Every call you made trying to connect. Every silent moment where you waited for effort that never came. It all starts to make sense to them now. But by the time it does, you're already gone. Emotionally, spiritually, and energetically. They may try to come back. They may even reach out, but it's no longer about them, because during that same time, something powerful has shifted within you. You've grown through the silence. You've expanded in the void. You no longer see your love as something to give away recklessly. You've realized that your energy is currency, and not everyone can afford the cost of your presence. So while they're missing what they had, you're building something new. Not for them, for you. And you're no longer chasing closure because life has given you something better, clarity. You now see that missing someone is not enough to rebuild what was broken. Missing you is not the same as valuing you. Many will miss you when you're gone, but not all of them deserve the chance to return, because what they really miss is the benefit of having you in their life, not the responsibility of keeping you there. They miss the warmth, but not the effort, the comfort, but not the commitment. And you've come too far to settle for half love and full apologies with no changed behavior. It's easy to romanticize someone missing you, but what matters more is whether they respected you when they had access to you. Did they honor your presence? Did they protect your heart? Or did they assume you'd always be there, forgiving endlessly, staying silently? When someone starts to miss you, it's rarely because they've changed. It's often because they're uncomfortable with the silence your absence created. That silence mirrors their failures, their choices, their indifference. It reminds them of what they took for granted. And while they sit in reflection, you now move in protection of your peace, your spirit, and your standards. You know now that your value is not based on how deeply someone misses you, but how consistently they show up when you're present. Missing you is easy. Treating you right is the real task. And anyone who couldn't do that when you were giving your all doesn't deserve the version of you who's finally healed. Matter. You're no longer available for temporary remorse and recycled promises. You've stepped into a season where your peace matters more than their regret. And that shift in energy changes everything. You're no longer driven by a desire to be remembered. You're driven by a desire to be respected. You don't just want someone to miss you. You want someone to match your effort, to honor your presence, to cherish you in real time. Because you know now, your love is not a memory to miss. It's a gift to experience. And only the worthy will ever receive it again.